So Akhtar, it's so good to see you, even though we're not in person.
It's so good to see you, and so good to be back at the Social Innovation Summit, albeit not in person, but it is so phenomenal to see this energy continue.
No, it was interesting as I was sitting there and as I was listening to Charles, and then as I was listening to Zeev open it up and really just focusing on the optimism. And that really being what we're talking about. And I saw as we were going through the different videos, the whole power of people. And I think what you've done and your book is something that is so at the hearts of what people have been digging into. For the last year, people have been trying to figure out how to be optimistic. And one of the things they've been searching for is what their purpose is. And so what really got you to putting this pen to paper and getting us to looking at this purpose mindset and what companies and individuals can do?
Yeah, so when I started writing the book and interviewing people about the book, there was never even a glimmer of thought in my head that, come March 2020, life would turn around so dramatically. Right? To me, this question was, why is it that there are people who take this opportunity to go beyond their growth mindset, which is the focus on self-improvement, which leads to workforce improvement, which leads back to self-improvement, which is the seminal work that Professor Carol Dweck did from Stanford University, to applying and introducing a new angle to this work and what I call the purpose mindset, where you're introducing the trinity of the self, the workplace, and the community. And what we saw last year in March, as soon as we shut down, the number of people, just community, ordinary citizens who came out to rally behind, right? Getting meals to those that could not get meals, stitching, sewing masks, because masks were in short supply, opening food kitchens, trying to figure out ways by which technology can get into the hands of kids so that they can still continue learning. So that optimism was part of what drove us through this full year as we are now slowly opening up.
Well, it's interesting because I think that people are looking for something to give back. And one of the things that we've realized is people want to do that in very different ways. There's not a set path for what it means. And for some, to your point, it's focusing more on that community piece and what can they do over and above in that area. But for others, it's that reflection of how can I leverage my skills in a fundamentally different way in order to empower others to be able to do more, and for marginalized communities to be able to have more resources. Purpose in that way is so complicated. How do you get people, as they look at those different quadrants, to focus in on which are ones and how do they have them intersect, especially when they've focused so much on maybe one of them versus all of them together?
So to me, I think what I'm talking about and discussing in the book, and by just using Microsoft as an example, because I spent a lot of time at Microsoft with the Microsoft philanthropy team, trying to understand why certain people got driven by purpose, is to really argue that it is a mindset. Purpose can continue to change, but the mindset is, are you really putting yourself as part of society, and whatever you're doing is not only going to benefit you and your work, but it will also benefit society? Or are you doing it as something different? And what I'm arguing is that every single person every day can show up and make a difference in small ways, big ways. Smile at somebody who is masked. Your eyes will light up, their eyes will light up. It just brings joy to people. So it's really this ability for us to start moving from this internal focus on the me to the we. And in doing so, you're extending the common good. And what I highlighted in the book were 5 principles that I think apply to all of us to be able to utilize. 1, work from your strengths. All of us have strengths. And if we can apply our strengths, Neurological science actually shows that your brain waves start emulating and overcoming your weaknesses. So it's a neurological thing. It's not just, something to say, hey, we all have strengths, so let's apply it. But it actually shifts your mindset. Second, put on the frame of abundance. So many people, as you will see this year, took very little resources and applied it to make phenomenal progress. Just look at Zeev and the Social Innovation Summit. When he started, it was just an idea. He got a bunch of people together for dinner and said, would you like to meet? And we all said yes. And look at it now. So don't expect to have all the resources at once. Start, and you will make progress. Third, think about being effective rather than efficient. It is the impact that counts, and not whether you've actually done things the right way. It is picking the right things to do. Fourth, we are no longer in the age of organizations. We are in the age of creating movements. Organizations become the vehicle through which movements proliferate. But it's not about trying to create a structure. It is actually trying to bring everybody together along a path. And that's what we are doing at the Social Innovation Summit. We are actually joining a path and a movement. And finally, the fifth, it's all about moving on that path of generosity to empathy and compassion. And if you do that, then what you are doing is that purpose becomes that source of healing. As Professor Raj Sisodia writes in his book, The Healing Organization, purpose gives you the ability to heal yourself, and it is that renewable energy that allows you to keep going forward.
Well, and it's interesting because the one thing is you've been talking about purpose. I think people have really decided that there's some moral obligation around purpose, that purpose has to be something that I actually believe is also purposeful. And I think as we went through this year, a lot of people talked about things that were purposeful that maybe others would or wouldn't agree with. And so how do we look at this as, in order to be purposeful, does it have to be something that elevates community and society, or can you be actually purposeful around things that really galvanize yourself and your family? And how do we use that word so it doesn't end up being something that we've defined already how it has to look like in order to be purposeful?
The world is a big place. Cultures have a different sense of what is, I don't want to use the word right and wrong, but there is a huge path and a spectrum in which you can do work. So I would really urge people not to get fixated on the morality of what you're doing versus the act of being part of the community. Right? To me, purpose is, are you showing up in your community? Whatever that may be. However small or large you want to define your community. It is more about saying, and especially in this year, as we have been completely locked up, and now that we are coming out, how are you going to come out? How are you going to show up? What are the steps you're going to say that I am part of this collective? And it's not a morality statement around one company and their industry or the work that you are doing. Purpose can even show up in the simplest form, right? Starbucks, barista, we go to Starbucks because there is a particular amount of joy we get. Otherwise, you can get coffee anywhere. There's a language that has been developed. So I would argue that it is more about how we think about ourselves. And then the important thing that happens is that it actually allows for the benefits to come to your work. Because how you work and how you show up for work also changes.
Well, and I think it's interesting because some people now, and obviously we know the emergence of the incredible B Corp, and so many organizations and people saying, well, in order for my company truly to be purpose-driven, we need to change and we need to be a B Corp. And unless we're officially actually looking at the social impact that we have before we look at revenue, we actually aren't purposeful. And I always struggle with that because I think that there's some incredible organizations that are very much purpose-driven that certainly aren't B Corps. And I think that there's a place for both within this notion of how do you contribute in a way that really has that North Star. That's not just about what you're in business for, but why you're in business. How do you look at that and really help to designate it? Are those really the only companies that are purpose-driven? Is that has to be the mandate?
I don't think so. Right. So what is the role of business? Right. So one is obviously you want to create something that consumers and people want, whether it's a service or it's a product. And that you are also ensuring that you are not depleting resources from the planet. Right? So you're going to leave behind something for others to flourish in. Whether you do it as a B Corp, whether you do it as an S Corp, whether you do it as a C Corp, are labels. Now, B Corps are great because it actually gives those that are starting out a North Star of a direction to go into. But that's not the only way. I think that the important thing for everybody to understand, you're not going to get, well, I mean, I shouldn't speak on behalf of Microsoft, but it'd be very hard for Microsoft to suddenly wake up one day and say, we're going to register as a B Corp.
Well, and I think as people look to say, how do they fit those things together? So what if you're not working for a Microsoft, right? What if you're not arguably working for a PwC that's so focused on our purpose and the why we do what we do? But what if that's not the company that you're currently at? How do you have these things come together? Because I don't necessarily think the answer is you shouldn't be there. How do you really look to nurture that organization? And in many cases, those organizations also have a purpose statement, but might not be living it. How do you become a part of the positive movement to change other than just saying, I'm going to leave?
Correct. So one of the things that I try and show through my book and through the examples, that even as a company like Microsoft, right? I have an example of the TEALS program, which Kevin Wang launched as an employee, which was to provide computer science education in high schools. He came up with this idea. He came to me. I kind of looked at, I don't know what this computer science education is. I mean, he kind of kept doing it. We kept giving him a little bit of money. Till one day, Satya Nadella called me up and said, what are you doing? This is something that the company should be behind fully. Right? So it's not that just because I was enlightened, I actually understood the value of the program somebody in the company was trying to push. It took him 4 years to get to convince me. So the point being that anybody can actually start something in any company, find ways to eventually climb the ladder. So even an enlightened company like Microsoft didn't really gravitate to it right up front. And I'll give you another example. A small company here, iCertis, which is now a unicorn. When everything shut down, they would feed meals to the employees every day because of their location. People couldn't get to food quickly, smaller company. One of the employees came to the CEO and said, look, my wife is a teacher. Kids are not being fed in the school. Do you think we can take the money that we are saving by not feeding ourselves and feed kids? And the CEO said, yes, let's do it. But that's not where it stopped. What happened is that it suddenly gave permission to employees to come up with new ideas. They have started vaccination drives. They've actually given, now they call themselves 7 Days for Humanity, where they actually give everybody 7 days off to do what they want to do to improve humanity. They started focusing on DEI. So a startup which was totally focused on revenue generation, just because of an employee willing to take the risk to talk to the CEO, got a mind shift happening. So you can do this. And that's where I think it is very important for all of us to take the initiative. And you may fail, so what? It may take you 4 years, that's okay. But if you don't try, you will never achieve it.
Well, and I think that that's a great place for us to be able to give back to the Social Innovation Summit as they enter into the next speakers for the day, because this is something that we're not going to get right just tomorrow or the next day. It's a journey. It's something that has to be a part of what you're willing to do and those steps that you're willing to take. And I do believe very strongly that the book helps to outline what are some of those and what do they look like. And I also think that having those conversations both with your family as well as those conversations with your company about how do they continue to evolve and how do we learn from everything that's happened over the last year. And so before we wrap up, are there any last words of how people can really embrace those key notions of your book, but really look within themselves to determine how to do more and really get at the power of people and what they can do to really make this world different?
So two thoughts. First, let's try and talk to all of us, including our kids, as to not what you want to be. We focus a lot on what we want our kids to be, what we want to be. Instead, we should be focusing on who we want to serve. And if you put on that frame of service, you can become a doctor, you can become a nurse, you can become a biomedical engineer if your service is healing people. The world open up, and then you can actually move through it rather than getting confined in one particular thing that you want to become. So the first thing is, look at it from the perspective of who you want to serve. Second, in the words of our poet laureate Amanda Gorman, who spoke at the inauguration of President Biden, for there is always light if we are brave enough to see it, if we are brave enough to be it. Purpose is that light within. All it takes is for you to switch it on. It doesn't matter whether your light is a floodlight or it's a candle. What it still does is that it lights up. And that lighting up is that flame that warms you and then warms the community around you. And purpose is just that journey, right? It is just being on that journey. But it is that journey for yourself as much as it is for the company. Because the workplace is where we spend a lot of our time. And if the workplace can provide opportunities for you to build that muscle so that you become a bridge and create bridging networks where we are able to connect over different groups of people, where we are able to have conversations, then you actually make the world a better place. And that's really where humanity is.
Well, thank you for allowing us to find ways within ourselves to be brave. And I will try to get my floodlight out because I do believe it'll take more than a candle. But I certainly know that as we continue on, and I'm going to hand it back to Zeev, that the Social Innovation Summit is a place that we can all get that light and we can all challenge ourselves to be brave. And so thank you so much. It is always an incredible pleasure and really look forward to being able to break bread with you in person very soon. So Akhtar, thank you.
Thank you so very much, Shannon, and so very much, Zeev and the Social Innovation Summit and the whole group. Looking forward to being part of this conversation.